Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 200. Yes, 200. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, December the 19th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Well, last week I did a podcast on UFOs, UAPs. UAPs are the new UFOs. Lots of good responses from lots of listeners, so thank you for that. So based on that, podcast number 200 needed to be something extraordinary, okay? So what I'm doing is UAPs are the new UFOs, part 2. I'm not necessarily going to introduce a lot of new information on UAPs, on UFOs, but I'm going to expand on some of the stuff that I did last week to, if nothing else, just reinforce the importance, maybe that's the wrong word, the emphasis that I think needs to be put on stuff that's flying out there that maybe is not getting the attention from others that should. So I'm going to take primarily, arguably, the most famous UFO sighting of all time, the most recent, most famous UFO sighting of all time, the Tic Tac UFO off the coast of California. And I'm going to expand on that and give 3 different perspectives on this UAP sighting by educated, dependable U.S. Navy personnel. And maybe you'll see after the end of this essay, the credibility, if not importance, of getting to the bottom of this phenomenon. But first, I want to talk a little bit about something that's near and dear to my heart, and it's automobiles. And as most of you know, I'm a big fan of Jaguars. I own 2. My daily driver is a 2016 Jaguar XE, all-wheel drive 3.0 liter supercharged car. That's my daily driver. I've also recently acquired a 1951 Jaguar Mark 7, and it doesn't run. It was my father's, and it needs a lot of work. It sat in his garage for about 50 years, but it's in restorable shape, and I've undertaken the almost insurmountable task of turning that straw into gold. So I own 2. So I love cars. I love Jaguars. And there was a quote by Sir William Lyons, who was Jaguar's founder. And Sir William Lyons said once upon a time, "A car is the closest thing that we will ever create to something that's alive." And Jaguar still believes that. In fact, the start button on my Jaguar glows red, and it just doesn't glow red, but it pulses. Pump, 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 pump. It pulses a red glow, simulating a heartbeat, which I think is very cool. But I admit I have a fascination with automobiles, and I've had a fascination with automobiles ever since I started driving. My cars over the years have included a 62 Ford Fairlane, my first car, a 68 Pontiac Catalina hardtop, 1970 Cadillac Eldorado, a 1979 Monte Carlo, 1987 Acura Integra, and the 3 cars that I currently own, a 2009 Saturn Sky Redline 2.0 liter turbocharged, the 2016 Jaguar XE 3.0 liter supercharged car. In fact, that was Sir Ian Collins' last designed car, a whole lot like the F-Type, same engine as the F-Type, by the way, and the 1951 Jaguar Mark 7 with the original 3.4 liter engine, the same engine they put into the Jaguar XKEs. Now, I've had many other cars, but they really don't matter. Only those cars truly matter to me. The others, just a variety, a mix of GMs, Fords, Chryslers, AMCs, Mazdas, vehicles that were used to haul me or my family to get from point A to point B. And they were fine. They served a purpose. but they were just soulless boxes, kind of like a bus that I could take wherever I wanted. They really didn't mean anything to me, okay? But the aforementioned cars certainly do. Now, if this pandemic has shown me one thing, it's to pursue your dreams and have fun in the process. Within reason, of course. You don't want to sell the farm just to have fun. But cars, food, drink, and loved ones, those are the 4 things in life that are very important to me and make me smile. And contact with loved ones, well, it's been challenged with this pandemic, okay? You can't see as often, much less hug or kiss your loved ones. You can't see your buddies. You can't see your friends like you used to because people are trying to stay safe, okay? So things have been stifled, at least cut back. So you have to compromise on number 4, which means I do not compromise on 1, 2, and 3, okay? So anyway, just a word of advice. I say this because I had a conversation with a buddy of mine this week, and he's considering buying a Alfa Romeo Stelvio. But he doesn't want to buy it because, well, the truck he has is fine, and it may cost too much, and he thinks it might break and cost money to repair. I stopped trying to convince him to buy it because it's his own money. It's certainly something I believe he could afford, but he doesn't want to pull the trigger for whatever reason. My advice to you, to anybody out there, if you see something that you're passionate about, and if you can afford it, if you can swing it, go for it. Because you only live once. Okay? Now the essay. UAPs are the new UFOs, part 2. Now, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Tic Tac UFOs, okay? And I talked about them briefly. I've done a whole podcast on the Tic Tac UFO in the past, and it was Commander Fravers, the Navy pilot who actually saw the UFO and is actually kind of on the podcast, if not talk show circuit, talking about this. But he wasn't the only one who witnessed these Tic Tac UFOs. There were others. And I'm going to give 3 accounts of the Tic Tac UFO phenomenon by 3 different people. I'm going to give the synopsis from a gentleman named Kevin Day. He was a senior radar operator on the USS Princeton. I'm going to give the account of Chad Underwood. He was another Navy pilot who took to the skies after Commander Fravor landed, and we're going to review Commander Fravor's synopsis of it as he presented it on Tucker Carlson's show. And the 3 sources that I've used for today's essay are not, coast to coast. It's not Beyond the Star, To the Stars Academy. It's not Jimmy Church's Fade to Black. It's none of those sources. Okay, here are the sources that I used: the History Channel, Fox News, Tucker Carlson's program, and the UK Independent. 4 very mainstream news sources, okay? These are traditional news sources. And if you remember, the news source that broke the Tic Tac UFO story, that made it credible, was the New York Times. Now, without being political, okay, and take politics out of this, please, because I know there's some of my right-leaning friends that say, the New York Times is just a rag. It's full of baloney. Actually, the New York Times is a very credible news source. The problem with the New York Times has been, in my opinion, is they tend to blur the lines between the op-ed page and the news page, and they don't always present all sides to a story, okay? That's my problem with the New York Times. Nothing that they, for the most part, nothing that they present is false or made up or a lie. Sure, there's been cases where they've been wrong, but for the most part, the New York Times is a very credible news source, as is the UK Independent, as is Fox News, as is the History Channel, okay? Very credible sources, very mainstream sources. And those are the 3 that I'm going to go ahead and talk about on today's essay. Now, Kevin Day, his account of the Tic Tac UFO. Now, Kevin Day was the senior radar operator on the USS Princeton, Okay, that was the ship that asked Fravor and other Nimitz pilots to investigate the UAPs that have been off the coast of California. And it actually began as a routine naval exercise, but soon would become one of the best documented, if not most baffling, UFO sightings in the 21st century. Witnesses included highly trained military personnel, among them several deeply experienced radar operators and fighter pilots. Day was one of the radar operators. And at the time, these sightings were, these gentlemen were at the controls, ladies and gentlemen, were at the controls of arguably the most advanced flight technology ever created. Yet no one could explain what it was they saw. This was back in November 2004 in the Pacific Ocean, about 100 miles southwest of San Diego. Now, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, which included the nuclear power carrier and the missile cruiser USS Princeton, were conducting a series of drills prior to deployment in the Persian Gulf. Okay? Now, about 2 p.m., two FA-18F Super Hornet fighter jets from the Nimitz received an unusual order from an operations officer aboard the Princeton. Now, these fighter pilots were already airborne. The pilots were told to stop their training maneuvers and proceed to new coordinates for a real-world task. Now, more ominous, the officer asked if they were carrying live weapons, and they said, no, we're not. Okay. Now, the Princeton's highly advanced radar had been picking up mysterious objects for several days. Several days. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. And the Navy called them Anomalous Aerial Vehicles, AAV, another acronym. That's the term the military preferred to use instead of UFOs. Okay, again, because UFOs are for the tin hat crowd. AAVs, not so much. Now, according to Kevin Day, the Princeton's senior radar operator at the time, his screen showed well over 100 AAVs over the course of a week. 100. Not just 1 or 2 or 10 or 20. 100. Over 100. Watching them on display was like watching snow fall from the sky, he said to the History Channel. Now, according to Day, the AAVs appeared at an altitude greater than 80,000 feet. Now, that's far higher than commercial aircraft or military jets typically fly. Initially, Princeton's radar team did not believe what they were seeing, chalking up the anomalies to an equipment malfunction. But after they determined that everything was operating as it should be, they began detecting instances in which the AAVs dropped with astounding speed to lower, busier airspace. Day approached the Princeton's commander about taking action. Day said, I was chomping at the bit. I really wanted to intercept these things. Now, two fighters were diverted to intercept one of the strange objects. When they first arrived on the scene, the pilots didn't see any flying objects, but they did observe what the lead pilot, Commander David Fravor, referred to as a disturbance in the ocean. Fravor said the water was churning. It was white with waves breaking over the top and looked like a large object was just under the surface. Then they noticed one of the objects flying about 50 feet above the water. Now, Fravor, the commander of the elite Black Aces Squadron, who was a Top Gun program graduate with more than 16 years of flying experience, this was no rookie, described it as about 40 feet long and shaped like a Tic Tac candy with no obvious means of propulsion. White, no rings, no rotors. Even odder were the swift and erratic movements, which Fravor described to the History Channel as something he had never seen in his life. This thing would go one way and then the other, similar to if you threw a ping pong ball against the wall. Now, another Navy pilot who served as Fravor's wingman in the air that day and spoke to History Channel on conditions of anonymity because she didn't want to be she didn't want to be known who she was, gave an account very similar to Fravor's. Now a high-ranking Navy officer, she was a rookie pilot back in 2004, but she remembered being terrified watching as more experienced pilots tried to intercept the strange craft. It was so unpredictable. High G's, rapid velocity, rapid acceleration. So you're wondering, how can we possibly fight this? Now, as Fravor flew around it, he said the craft ascended and came right at his plane. Then all of a sudden, it kind of turns and rapidly accelerates beyond anything I've seen. It crosses my nose, and then it's gone. As the Tic Tac accelerates into the distance, according to Day, Navy jets began